We have two incredible versions of biscuits and gravy coming up. One very historic and one a little more modern. That worked. So biscuits are a pretty simple food, but there's a couple ways you can ruin them. A big way is by having your oven not hot enough. So it really needs to be under 500 but over 400. Anything less than 400 and the butter melts out of the biscuit. If you get a really hot oven, and this is why wood burning ovens are so great, the lard and the butter steam inside of the biscuit. And so that's what causes it to puff. But it all has to do with a really hot, dry temperature. So yeah, trick number one, not ruining a biscuit. Today we're making more than one perfect biscuit recipe. It's a biscuits and gravy challenge. 2 different biscuit recipes, 2 gravy recipes, and everything done in cast iron pans. Plus, baked in an old iron oven. Comfort food at its best in an historic 1800s cabin in the dead of winter. Modern biscuits and gravy are pretty fancy. We think of them now as humble foods, but back on the frontier, they made this classic dish in an even more simple and beloved way. So let's compare them. Cowboy biscuits and gravy, or SOP as the boys called it, versus the fancy modern version we often cook in our family. Now, spoiler alert, the winner at the end really threw me for a loop. I love old cookbooks. I love old recipes. One thing that's hard to find in them is good old comfort foods. Biscuits and gravy. Don't get me wrong, people ate this food. Almost everyone ate it. But the recipes didn't make the cookbooks. Where you do find some old recipes are in letters and newspapers. The ingredients run the gambit today. Buttermilk, canned milk, bacon drippings, sausage with sage and pepper, all the way down to good old-fashioned flour and water. Today, my girl Maggie and I are going to test and compare the simplest version. All right, come on, help me. Known on chuck wagons out on the range as sinkers and sop, versus a modern fancy version that I know we are all gonna love. Now, we know people ate biscuits and gravy regularly out on wagon trains, on the range, or by the comforts of a wood stove at home. But let's talk about perhaps the least known one today, the Cowboy classic called sinkers and sop. Now, with a name like that, you might get your hopes rather low, and I'll admit I did too. But just wait for it. The result might really surprise you. Alongside that, we're making the creme de la creme of foods, if you ask me. Jackson family buttermilk biscuits with a big hearty batch of rich sage sausage gravy. Say that 10 times fast. Let's jump right in and make sinkers, the classic cowboy biscuit. This one's adapted from a Texas newspaper, published March 3rd, 1878. Good work. With the firewood brought in, let's jump straight into making it. We start with 2 cups of flour, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, and a heap of baking powder. Now, depending how old a cowboy you're talking about here, the chemical leavening might be saleratus. This is similar to these modern versions, but not as reliable. Now, before that, there was no chemical leavening, so it would have been some sort of a sourdough yeast. But what makes a cowboy biscuit is really the lack of one giant ingredient: milk. Almost any modern recipe you'll look up today calls for milk or buttermilk. Well, guess what you didn't have out on the open range? No chuck wagon could bring fresh milk or even sour milk along for more than a few days to a week on the trail. So a true cowboy biscuit is made with one key swap: water. But before we can get to adding the liquid, we have to make sure all of our dry ingredients are mixed together, and then we're going to cut in the next critical ingredient that separates the cowboy from the modern dude biscuit. And that is good old-fashioned lard. Not Crisco vegetable shortening, not lovely butter, just pure leaf lard rendered from a pig. Some of this lard out of here.
Now that is called lard.
It is. It's frozen lard.
What is lard?
Lard, or leaf lard, is the fat from around the kidneys of a pig. So it's not fat from muscles or anything else. It's just from the kidneys. That's the good stuff.
Can you do cow lard or just pig lard?
If it comes from that same part in a cow, it's called tallow. See how it's pure white?
Yeah.
That's the good stuff.
What if it's yellow?
If it's really yellow, that means it has too much muscle fat. And it'll usually have a much stronger flavor, and not in a good way. We're gonna chop it into little tiny pieces and mix it in.
Like this?
Yeah. Just mush them until they're either the size of peas or they're so broken down you don't even see the lard anymore. Get a little flour on my hands. And we're gonna set the spurtle aside. Sometimes the best way to do a job is straight with your hands. Let's check. You did a really nice job, Max. Now here comes our ice cold water to swap for the milk. All right, we want just enough for it to come together and be moist, but not too much that it's like gummy. You tell me if you need more water, okay?
Okay.
Without the aid of added fats or the rising help from buttermilk, we have to make sure we do the simple jobs perfectly. We need ice cold ingredients, even a cold bowl. All easy things in a winter cabin. And we need minimal handling of the dough.
I rolled my sleeves up. I just want to spread it. I'm about the dough. Get a little flour on my hands.
Just bringing that dough together. I don't want to knead it. I just want it to come together. All right. Now, let's get our trusty biscuit cutter, and these Cowboy biscuits are well on their way. The way I like to make biscuits is I don't knead the dough and I don't roll the dough. I just shape it into a little disc, being as gentle as possible, and then I cut out biscuits. And we're just gonna do a couple of these sinkers as a test. Okay, ready? Push that down. Yeah, you got it?
I get it.
All right, barely
How many are we
messing
gonna
with
make?
the dough. Well, we're gonna make these, then we're gonna make a better batch. All right, pull it out. Perfect. All right, there's our sinkers. At this stage, they kind of look like any biscuit I've made, but time will tell if the flavor and the texture is there. I have serious doubts about this one. Now, back during the gold rush or out moving cows on the prairie, one ingredient they never had was fresh milk. You just couldn't bring a cow and milk on a journey like that. And if you didn't have it for your biscuits, you didn't have it for your gravy either. So the recipe for sop comes into being. No doubt some version of this food is ancient, but its usage became a truly American staple and part of our collective diet in the 1800s. Time to fry up bacon and sausage. Woo. Basically, it's the drippings of fat from almost anything, bacon, beef, lamb, you name it, mixed with a couple tablespoons of flour and water. Maybe you had fresh bacon to get the grease from. Maybe you just had the traditional can in the cupboard with the drippings left over from previous days. That is leftover bacon grease. Now there's a part of me that thinks this is gonna be particularly wretched. I just can't picture this tasting good with so few ingredients. Just leftover fat, flour, and water. But this food was beloved on the trail, so I'm gonna withhold my judgment until we taste it. The sop is simmering away on the cook stove, and it'll need to stay there for 20-30 minutes, just gently cooking down. And when the sop looks like it's just about close to done, I'm gonna pop those sinkers in the oven so we have hot biscuits and hot gravy ready at the same time. I keep stirring this gravy. I have a feeling it'll just turn into clumps if I don't. When the time is right, the sinkers will go into a preheated cast iron skillet. Not blazing hot, just hot enough. I don't want the bottoms to burn. And into the oven they'll go. So what we've got here are the bones of the very historic Cowboy sinkers and sop. The jury is absolutely still out on what these are going to taste like. But there is one trick that might be able to make even the humblest of humble biscuits reign supreme. It's the difference between okay and incredible. And that has nothing to do with what is inside the biscuit dough. I think we just might use every piece of cast iron in this whole place. I want to see if these come out like bricks, or if they somehow reflect the magic of the cast iron pans and ovens that they're cooked in, and maybe, just maybe, they come to life after a good baking. So when you put the biscuits into a really hot oven, there is a certain magic that happens. Biscuits are a pretty simple food, but there's a couple ways you can ruin them. A big way is by having your oven not hot enough. So it really needs to be over 400 degrees, under 500 but over 400. Anything less than 400 and the butter melts out of the biscuit. If you get a really hot oven, and this is why wood burning ovens are so great, the lard and the butter steam inside of the biscuit. And so that's what causes it to puff. But it all has to do with a really hot, dry temperature. It'll work in a conventional oven. We make biscuits all the time. But of course, in a hot wood burning oven, there's a little extra magic. Speaking of magic, I do know one guaranteed dazzler of a recipe that we have used for years. It's nearly foolproof. This is fancy biscuits. It's partly modern, yes, but it has deep roots in cowboy cooking. The same rules apply as with cow camp sinkers, but these ones go over the top. So let's make them right now, with a whole heap of extra ingredients that the cowboy sinkers were missing. Buttermilk, a dash more sugar, and delicious cold butter.
I always find it makes it a little easier if I give it a chop with a big knife first, into nice pea-sized bits. Size of a big green pea.
This lever right here, that's how you turn the oven on. Ready?
You turned it up.
On.
Oh. You turned it up.
Off. But we want it on.
It's burning hot.
Is it?
While all this is going on, of course, we have to get a wash pan full of water heating up on the cook stove. There's no instant hot water here. Heck, there's no running water here. So before our hands get covered in flour, it's wise to plan ahead. That dishpan will jump onto the cook stove and back off, down to the floor as it cools off or space is needed. And in a cabin that started off rather cold,
Hot.
a nice toasty pot by the stove with a pan full of hot water, well, it's not a bad place to crouch down and camp next to.
This is paradise.
We've got the cold butter sliced. Let's get those dry ingredients all mixed up. Put it down a little. There we go. Your family probably has a pretty close version to this one in its history too. These are fancy biscuits. Titled so because they use a handful more ingredients than the old cowboy kind. This is my own modern biscuit recipe that I put on paper just after our first child was born. It's got buttermilk, a mix of lard and cold butter, a touch of sugar, salt, and a little more than a good heaping tablespoon of baking powder. Good. Put it in there. 2, 3. If I've got a bit of cream of tartar and baking soda kicking around, I throw them in too. But this is one of those recipes, I just feel the amounts and I toss them in. It's pretty forgiving, and it's always a hit. Honey on top is the way the family likes it. Now I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Remember our 3 tricks to perfect biscuits. A hot oven, cold ingredients, and minimal mixing of the dough.
Really?
Now, I'm ashamed to say it, but no one in my family will join me in the delights of gravy on top of biscuits. They all got my husband Robbie's taste buds. But for my money, nothing beats the combo of sausage gravy on a hot biscuit. The gravy we'll make to go atop today's fancy biscuits is a mix of modern decadence and one really old school ingredient. And this one is going to take a little improvisation.
Woo. But I forgot the can opener, didn't I?
Oh.
That worked.
But you gotta make 2 holes so the air can escape.
You gotta make 3 holes.
Oh, really?
In an old Western Horseman magazine, there was a recipe from a wonderful Chuck Wagon cook where she talks about the best way to make milk gravy being with canned evaporated milk. Now, not sweetened condensed milk, just evaporated milk, which has some of the water taken out of it. Now, this version is a new one for me, so let's try it together. If I were betting, I'd say that this gravy will have a richness above and beyond anything I've made before. The sausage has to be fried up first in the cast iron skillet until it's brown and has released some good grease. I threw in a couple tablespoons of bacon grease too, from a few strips I fried up as a pre-meal snack for Mags. The sausage is seasoned with sage from the garden and a bit of brown sugar, salt, and pepper. Nothing too wild, but some heat from more spices here would also be great. So that sausage is looking good. Now comes the fun part. We add in a couple tablespoons of flour to get that browned just a little bit to take the flavor of raw flour out. That's coming along really nicely, and it's going to help our gravy thicken. After a minute, it's time for the canned milk. I'm starting with a cup, but you'll see that as this simmers on the stove, it thickens rapidly. So as I go along, I'm adding more and more milk until it looks like the right consistency to me. But however you like it, more thick, more thin, go with that. All 4 recipes are made. 2 types of biscuits, 2 types of gravy. Now it's down to seasoning for final flavor, and all either one needs is just some fresh ground pepper and a dash of salt. Gravy likes a good dose of each. The Cowboy sop gets a few more twists of the spurtle, and then the sausage gravy comes down from the warming oven for its final seasoning. Both gravies are hot, and the biscuits are ready to come out of the oven. With recipes like this, both the biscuits and the gravy have to hold their own, and the only way to find out if the combination has worked is to put them all together. First out of the oven is the Cowboy version, so let's put together our sinkers and sop. Alright, now this is the big test. So this is probably pretty close to what anybody out on a chuck wagon or a wagon train or anywhere where you didn't have a milk cow but you needed some hearty food to keep you going, this was the meal they ate.
Actually, these look pretty good.
This is sop, so it's a gravy made with water and bacon fat. So it has no sausage or bacon in it, it's just the fat mixed with water and flour, plus some salt and pepper for good measure. And the biscuits aren't made with buttermilk or milk or anything special, just water, lard, flour, and salt. Not the fancy stuff we're used to eating today with lots of butter and buttermilk and all those rich things. It was pretty much just fat and flour. That's pretty good. That is. Honestly, that's pretty good. Wow. I thought this was going to be pretty gross. I thought it was going to be dense and dry, and the gravy was just going to be, I don't know. It is so good. It is so good. It's got the saltiness. The textures are perfect. Perfect. I wouldn't complain about that biscuit anywhere. I mean, buttermilk lends some more flavor. I suppose it's lacking a little bit in that, but holy smokes. This is good. This is super good. I actually brought these biscuits home to Robbie to bring him some lunch, and he preferred these over the fancy buttermilk ones that I make all the time and that I know he loves. So that speaks for this recipe. Maybe the Cowboys knew what they were doing. But I haven't forgotten my gravy-fearing little girl. She gets a steaming, butter-laden biscuit all her own, with ranch honey on top.
Ooh. I am so hungry.
Okay.
I want that biscuit.
Ooh.
Eating for one whole.
Okay. Oh. Okay, it's all yours, darling.
Can I eat it yet?
Go eat it. Don't spill. Eat over your plate. Let's put together the fancy of the fancy, the gourmet biscuit and gravy. Now, I'm curious how the canned milk has deepened the flavor of the gravy.
Mm-hmm.
I know added sausage can't have hurt. Although the classic bare bones Cowboy recipes, I think they may already have won. Oh my goodness. Maggie, this is so good. Perfect thing on a muddy February day, huh? The fancy recipe for biscuits is a keeper, no doubt. But the shock for me is that Robbie chose the water and lard biscuits as his favorite. Now, I'm the gravy judge in this family, and I will say that the plain sop was terrific. No complaints. Beats any restaurant gravy I've ever had. Adding sausage and herbs, well, I'm not going to turn that down. It's a level above, especially with the added richness of the canned milk, and I sure enjoyed it. I tip my hat to Stella Hughes and the Western Horseman, along with some wonderful commenters on past videos, for suggesting the idea of canned milk gravy. Next week, we'll be out cooking a cast iron cottage pie in the cabin. And after that, a friend got us a porcupine. Yes, a porcupine. So I'm thinking we might need to make pulled porcupine sliders on sourdough rolls in the near future. Cheers, everyone.
3.
Cold weather has never felt so good.
Good job.
Just
want another?
one more.
One more. Pick the one you want.
This one.
Ooh.
Now this one looks good. Oh, how my tummy loves this stuff.
Yum.